everyone, and great to see all of you here at MSDI's first research seminar of the year. I know there was another one also planned, but it was kind of like MSDI with another school collaboration. This is the first MSDI research seminar of the year. I'd like to begin first by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathering today. For many of us and myself, this is the people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. For those of you that I might not have met in the past, and there are quite a few names here on the screen that I don't recognize, my name is Shireen Malikpour. I'm an associate professor at MSDI, and I also head up the PhD program at the Institute. I'm also one of the co-hosts of these research seminar series. If this is the first time you are attending an MSDI research seminar series, just a couple of words about that. It's basically a forum for us to come together once a month, roughly, and we often invite speakers either internally from Monash, sometimes from MSDI, in this case Jane today, but also sometimes from other Australian universities and also universities and research institutions internationally. We really invite speakers from very diverse disciplines and diverse backgrounds, but what is in common with all of them is that they all work on a topic related to sustainable development. So we ask them to come to this forum and present to us for about half an hour, roughly, a little bit more or less. And then we also have some time for questions and answer. And it is really an opportunity for us to hear from diverse research that is going on in the area of sustainable development, and also share some ideas, learn from each other, and exchange. Today, we are very happy that we have a speaker from our own MSDI who has just recently completed her PhD on the topic of transdisciplinarity in the context of planetary health. So Jane had a PhD journey with us, and while being a mom and having a young child, really juggling PhD and life and a young child, I really can't imagine how we can do that. She has successfully finished her PhD also with publication. So it's a great achievement. And we are here today to hear about her research and her findings and basically learn from her topic. Jane has a background in environmental planning and natural resource management. She did a very impressive master's degree in Berkeley in the US. I think that's really amazing. And then after that, she went to Indonesia and worked in the private sector in her home country, Indonesia, also on the topic of environmental planning and natural resource management. And then she came to Australia, started a PhD with us as part of the RISE program, which many of you might be familiar with, where we basically work in Indonesia and Fiji on upgrading informal settlements in those countries with more sustainable water and sanitation options. On that note, I just leave the floor now to Jane for you to start your talk today on transdisciplinarity in planetary health.
Great. Thank you so much, Shireen. And thanks again, May, for helping organize this seminar series. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Yes, I should have on. And yeah. All right. So thanks again for inviting me. It's really a great opportunity to get my PhD research out. And thanks everyone for taking the time to be here. It's good to see some of you again in this space. And for those I haven't met, my name is Jane, and I recently completed my PhD here at MSDI. I was conferred at the end of December, so it was a really great time to receive such a good news. For my PhD research, I looked deeply into the process of transdisciplinary collaboration, theoretically and empirically, and I will get into that in a moment. So I'm proposing a practice framework for co-designing new spaces and new ways for transdisciplinary research, especially amidst persistent inequities as a legacy of our shared global colonial histories. So I'd like to start also by acknowledging that today I'm calling in from, and much of this research was conducted on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, where Monash campuses are. And First Nations people have lived and cared for the land and waters for over 60 million years. I acknowledge that this land was never ceded and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge my supervisors, Annetta Bose, Tony Capon, and Diego Ramirez over at MADA, as well as MSDI as an institute without whose support this research would not have been possible. So it's an honor, and I'm looking forward to learning from the discussions also. It will be quite a short presentation, 15 minutes, so hopefully we can have more time for discussions. So in terms of the theoretical side of it, I was using planetary health as a theoretical lens, and which led me to propose a conceptualization of sustainable development as broadly encompassing this interrelated nexus of environment, health, and development. So that each of these fields, of course, is made up of diverse strands of theoretical underpinnings. Yet in recent decades, all of them in common have increasingly promoted and practiced transdisciplinary research to address real-world societal challenges and propose various transdisciplinary frameworks. For example, in sustainability science and transitions, in natural resource management, and in public health. I also sought insights from the lens of collaborative urban governance, which is my what I did my master's degree on. And I looked at the process of collaboration as a way of transcending and more fully embedding multiple diverse perspectives, epistemologies, and methodologies. We can no longer ignore also the increasing call from indigenous and decolonizing perspectives that see knowing as intertwined with being and doing, which sits quite differently than much of Western knowledge systems. So even though transdisciplinary research has been increasingly promoted as a means for solving these complex, wicked problems, much of the literature in the past decade has well documented various obstacles and challenges, and some of which related to higher transaction costs, historical scarcity of funding, and likelihood of tensions due to differences in the way people think and do things. And these practical challenges could well be amplified with the increasing scale and breadth of collaboration that encompasses planetary health. So my research aimed to address these gaps in the many existing TD frameworks and toolkits, as many of us are probably aware of. And while they offer valuable conceptual understanding, there are practical gaps, especially when conducting TD research in global South settings. So across the broad environment, health, and development fields, these practical experiences have not been thoroughly synthesized and examined together for potentially mutual learning. These frameworks also describe the ideal typical research process, but they mention collaboration quite generically without sufficient elaboration as to how the process might unfold. And finally, insights from Global South development studies, decolonizing perspectives, have not been well understood and incorporated in these TD research processes. My PhD research, I wanted to address these gaps, and develop a practice framework for how this type of research is practiced, especially in the global south. So it's perhaps worth a mention at this point that by global south, global north, I don't mean the geographical south and north. So because this is an academic audience, I just wanted to clarify that I'm just acknowledging the differences in financial, technical, and governance resources and capacities between high-income countries in the global north and middle and income and low and middle income countries in the global south. And I also use these acronyms in my thesis. So I realize this is a busy slide, but this is the framework development process, basically. So the framework development followed an iterative design process adapted from policy science, along with a theoretical meta-analysis of existing frameworks. I conducted empirical research comprising a literature review of recent practices across the environment, health, development nexus. Let me just turn on my laser pointer. There you go. And what are the lessons learned in terms of the constraining and enabling factors, and how do we address them? And I also did an in-depth case study of a contemporary. So the RISE program was my case study. And here's a sneak peek of the framework, which I'll go into more detail later. And the main findings are these themes relating to a stakeholder-centered process and at the phases of how a collaboration might unfold, and as aligned with the ideal typical TD research process here in the blue area. So a bit more about the case study, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. The RISE program is quite a unique case study because of its scale and breadth. And it's a planetary health research project, which also helped to identify the theoretical framing of my thesis. And it involves 13, if not growing, partners and diverse disciplines. It is gathering evidence using an RCT methodology, which is the gold standard in scientific research. And it's assessing the benefits of a physical, nature-based, water-sensitive infrastructure in informal settlements in Indonesia and Fiji. So that's quite unusual that an RCT is being used in a physical infrastructure upgrading in informal settlements. So that's what the informal settlements might look like before and after. But underneath the road, there is like a utility box and corridor that houses all the different aspects of these nature-based infrastructure. And these are some of the different types of constructed wetlands, and we're working in very narrow spaces, so that's another challenge. The process of designing the intervention was very participatory, involved the community, and it was, as well as in the infrastructure implementation, it involved the residents in building the infrastructure itself. So my PhD focused on Indonesia, and I looked at the early phases of design and implementation from 2017, 2018, and 2019. So yeah, I can talk a little bit more about the methodology itself in terms of sampling and whatnot. But this was sort of my conceptualization of, this is taken from my second paper, the idea that boundaries are, such a research project creates this boundary as a space for knowledge integration. So it might be useful to map out, what are some of the objectives, as well as how the research is structured and where the different stakeholders sit, whether they're global or local. And this is just one way of doing it, but the main idea is that this boundary space is created and all of these disciplines and stakeholders and elements interact within this boundary space. So this is the final practice framework itself, and I'm hoping that it has integrated and weaved in all these various findings and analyses. So I would say the framework is different than other frameworks that are already out there, because it emphasizes on, firstly, a practical stakeholder-centered process here in the orange core of the framework. And secondly, the unique circumstances of working in biodiverse contexts, for example, in LMICs or the Global South. And thirdly, the foundational considerations for individual and collective reflection and learning throughout the process. So here we have the stages of stakeholder collaboration in the center, roughly aligned with the research phases of initial co-design, implementation, and monitoring. And the foundational considerations at the early stages of stakeholder engagement would include reflecting on building a shared understanding of the sustainability challenge being addressed, the local context of the setting where the work is conducted, where key considerations could include indigenous knowledge that are pre-existing and are potentially useful in providing solutions, local knowledge and operational conditions, social, cultural, political, economic, historical context, which may be very nuanced and complex. So it's useful to have someone who's familiar with some of those. And of course, the laws and regulations, which all projects must adhere to. And then specifically, specific to the stakeholder engagement, is there an aligned vision as to what this future transformed system might look like? And how about values and ethics? Where are some of the stakeholders in terms of what they value? And what are the power dynamics among stakeholders? Who are the diversity of stakeholders and how are they interdependent? So, for example, what do they bring to the table and what is their interest and motivation in engaging in this collaboration, which some of which might change throughout the process and as they engage in different ways. So this is also this is from the collaborative governance literature, which is also supported by the case study. And of course, lastly, the how much hard work of boundary spanning and communication would be needed to bring this diversity together. So these factors underlie every aspect of the collaboration, starting from understanding stakeholders' contexts, such as the institutions and disciplines where they're from, as well as existing relationships and dynamics, to identifying stakeholder contributions, whether it's funding, knowledge, skills, but just as important, time and support and commitment. Then stakeholder interactions here are shaped by project level factors such as governance, culture, management, and coordination. And hopefully these then lead to stakeholder integration, which I found is in the case study to be that sense of mutual understanding, acceptance, and trust. Like, yes, I understand why we are collaborating, and I accept that we have our differences and that we trust each other to work together, as well as that team cohesion and reciprocity. In addition to, of course, the important research outputs such as innovation, conceptual framework, and the publications. It is generally agreed also across diverse fields that stakeholder transformations take place with some experience in transdisciplinary collaboration, including increased capacity for doing research with others, as well as other disciplines, shared agency and power to take action and try out different solutions, and of course, sustained benefits for human health, the environment, and more equitable outcomes. So if you'd like to know more, the concept of a practice framework is borrowed from the field of social work, which is commonly practiced in these power diverse, and vulnerable contexts. So it can include a South-North collaboration or South-South collaborations in LMIC contexts, or vulnerable settings in high-income countries, such as with marginalized populations. So And you may find that a lot of these concepts are not new within the specific fields, but what I've done hopefully is synthesized and linked across these different fields. So my PhD is more like that rather than like that. and it hopefully I've mapped out a sort of practice checklist, whether for co-design, troubleshooting, or just collective reflection. I've also included a set of more detailed reflexive practice questions that can be used in conjunction with the diagram. So the questions are organized around the foundational considerations. This just an overview of these foundational considerations on the left-hand column, and the phases of stakeholder collaboration from context, contribution, interaction, etc. And aligned with the ideal typical research process in the blue. So yeah, I would hopefully you guys might revisit some of my publications, which I'm very proud. And I forgot to change that this the fourth publication has also been accepted for publication and published. So yeah, there are more references, of course, in these publications, and I've gone a bit sparse on references in this presentation. But thanks again to my supervisors with whom I've co-authored my publications. And I'd like to end with this quote, which seems relevant. And if we really think about it, we everything is interrelated, right? And so we are here to awaken from our illusion of separateness. And I also just want to comment that this transdisciplinary research has definitely been a journey of personal transformation for me. Thank you once again, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thanks a lot, Jane. Really great to hear about your work and your various really high quality publications in high quality journals. So really congratulations on getting that done throughout the life of your PhD. I'm happy to open now for question. Maybe I can ask the first question and then give people time to also ask their questions. If you want to raise your hands, that would be great. But if you don't want to ask directly, you can also put your questions in chat. But we prefer if you can just talk and ask the question directly. My question was a little bit about, the kind of where you started with the gap in the literature being that a lot of that transdisciplinary studies of transdisciplinarity are coming from the global north and not much understanding or not much in the literature about the global south context. Now, you did your research in a global south context. Was there anything that was more unique to the global south compared to the global north and the studies that exist out there?
That's a good question, and I think one of the things that stood out and just on the top of my head right now is that somehow in the global south, this is a generalization, of course, but in Indonesia, for example, there's a huge sense already of just a tendency to collaborate. I look after my neighbor's kids, or I can be counted on to pick someone up from the school if their parents are not free, or just coming together. And in Indonesia, there are these gotong royong days or concepts where everyone in the neighborhood or in the alleyway comes out and cleans up the entire neighborhood. So there are things like that culturally already exist in many places in the global south, and we must be careful not to overlook those things because they can be a real asset and add to the potential for solutions that may be out there. So I guess that would be, and I'm not saying that in the global north people don't collaborate, but it just jumps out at me, that cultural tendency to work together.
And do you see that also among professionals? Because I think, in personal lives, there is one thing, but is that also the case across different sectors and professionals working in different sectors? So you see more collaboration as well in that global south context that you just used the example of?
Yeah, I think so. And I think in the global north, perhaps a good example is in the nature-based solutions, area, where engineers, ecologists, urban planners, community engagement is front and center, and so the idea is once we finish our work in our field, we ask around to the adjacent fields, what did I miss out? And everyone has their blind spots, obviously. Like nobody can see everything all at once. So your work is never final. And so there's that sense of could you just fill in or complement is complementarity. Yeah, I think is
Right.
important. Mm.
Is there any question from the audience?
Yeah, I've got one.
Peter, Peter,
Jane,
go ahead.
congratulations. Fascinating work. There's so many frameworks in sort of the health implementation space, and I think yours does stand out in terms of the breadth and certainly even the sort of leaning into the idea that you're not all coming from the same perspective. So I think it's very much building on that. I'm just wondering if you've explored, I know, for example, there's a review that a colleague of mine did. There's about at least 50, probably hundreds of like implementation frameworks. There's also quite a lot of co-design frameworks. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the next steps, whether you're thinking about seeing exactly how the transdisciplinary stuff adds to that.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what you're trying to implement and the stakeholders that you're working with. And sometimes it might be important to look across different frameworks and not just say this is the framework that is the be all and end all, and be open to understanding frameworks from different areas that are relevant as well. So I see my framework as kind of like a checklist. Let's say you've used this framework, you've used that framework, and it's not working. It's just another framework that you can hopefully reference and look at. Okay, have I considered this? Have I considered this? Have we considered that? So it's not really one framework is better than another. It depends
Yeah, no,
on.
I think yours has two very unique features. So one is the transdisciplinarity, and the other is the global south perspective. Whereas pretty much all of the frameworks, or most of them in other disciplines, are monodisciplinary or not inclusive. So I think that there's some real value in highlighting those differences as you move into future research, because yeah, I don't think all frameworks are. I don't think it's just another framework. I think it's a really interesting evolution.
Thank you so much for that. And the collaboration aspect too. I think a lot of frameworks just mention collaboration, and I'm like, what does collaboration mean? And they just stop there and not really expand on that. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter and Jane. Tal.
Thanks very much, Jane. Really fascinating and important work. I'm curious, in terms of your framework, what are the implications in terms of how research at universities is organised or funded or supported? And what does it mean in terms of how researchers are trained in order to be able to be involved in this kind of research?
Well, I guess it's limitless if you really want to get into that. I'm hoping that at least the funders could consider that for research to be brought into the real world, like there's some complementary perspectives that need to be introduced and incorporated. And it's not always about the primacy of science, and it's also about practice and implementation and business and community. And, so there are many aspects to everything, most things that we want to look at in sustainable development. And in terms of education, I'm hoping that, since undergraduate levels, there could be a real world complex challenges unit or something that opens a student's eyes that, yes, you're interested in this one thing, but how does that relate to this and that? And how do you actually apply that? And many of the universities already have that. And so it's just a matter of commitment and commitment of resources into that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that point about education is really spot on, and I think that's probably the easiest place where you can actually target big change and get big impact if you can actually implement this thinking and bring this thinking into the mix. Thanks. Miriam, you can go next.
Sure, and thank you, Jane. I know I've been trying to get you, I think, for like 2 years. So I'm going to get you in the next few weeks for like a longer conversation. But yeah, I've got many questions. But one was because of some of the keywords. Have you come across any of the system science frameworks, like the viable systems methodology or soft systems frameworks, while you did your work? Because some of the words implicated, and I'm just curious because they have been tried quite a bit in the Global South, and I was just curious if you've come across them and what your thoughts are on their viability, if you might.
Yeah. I did learn a little bit about complex systems during my master's, as well as I was trying to see how it could contribute to this. But there's such a huge field of system science. So complex adaptive systems is where like most of the socio-ecological systems research is sort of geared towards, and it has interlinkages in terms of thinking of things, systems as comprising of interrelated parts, and then each part sometimes has moves or then interacts in independent or interdependent ways. So, and that's the exciting part about innovation, right? Which is how you don't know what the outcome or what the actual solution is going to be at the start because of these all different interacting parts. And so that's also a reason to think about, I know it's such a hot topic at the moment, but diversity and inclusion as being so important, because you never know where the solution might come from. And if you really look at where we get things from or how we come to where we are, it is because of all of these things that are interacting together. The other part of that system, I suppose, is the leverage points concept. So understanding inputs and flows and outputs of resources and where there might be leverage points to change things. So that came into play in the first paper that I was in briefly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have a read, because I think there's some really interesting overlaps with between some of the really like the methodologies for implementation co-design in transdisciplinary states. Yeah, we have to have a chat, because I think I really love it, and I really like that you overlaid it with a practical lens, because it's like the truth is in the end you run a project and it's got to have some structure, but then having that transdisciplinary collaboration integrated in it is so valuable. Thank you.
Yeah. It's really nice, by the way, to finally meet many of these names that that come up in emails and stuff. But yes, to link the faces to the names, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks both of you. Is there any other question from the audience? Paris, please go ahead.
Jane. I have like a couple of related questions, or somewhat related. The first is how you found that collaboration spaces enabled open disagreement and potential critique. We found in our project in Indonesia as well that sometimes it's been difficult to find ways to help people feel comfortable to express what they really think about something rather than what they think we want to hear or whoever it is might want to hear. So I'm curious about that. And also, if you could elaborate on how you see co-design, transdisciplinary collaboration empowering vulnerable or excluded groups and communities.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that, Paris. I guess communication styles is very much part of cultures, and different cultures may have very different communication norms. So there might be more direct styles or less direct styles, and there may be more written styles and more verbal styles, and body language, and also different neurodiverse people may communicate differently and interact differently, and so people might might interpret body language differently. So it's so complex that maybe the way to go is to try different styles out of your comfort zone or norm that you would normally go to. And I think different cultures also communicate through relationships and trusted sort of networks, if you will. So if it's not coming from you, then it could come also from either an intermediary or someone else that might mention it, and without getting people to be defensive or just really, and also emphasize that you really value their contribution and that their engagement is important. And I think that's in my second paper, that these people, not these people, but like everyone contributes like something, right? So even the community members who don't really have much in the informal settlements, they offered their homes to be the center for the blood draw for the rice project, and they come to every meeting, and they sit through the surveys. Like that's a lot of time that they contribute. So the more you can acknowledge the value of their contribution, I think that's really uplifting their contribution as well. So in terms of how it can be more inclusive, I think part of that valuing people's and appreciating people's contribution is to be more inclusive as well. And some people really do need more time and to be listened to. And even if it's not directly relevant to what you're looking for, it is within their context of personal, like, their life. It's not just information is a piece of data, so it's more holistic in that way. But it takes a lot of time. So I think one of the funding questions is also, do the funders, we can design more time to be creating these spaces for dialogue and for getting to know each other and building that trust. That takes a long time. That's in my second paper as well. But also the funders, are they willing to tolerate this uncertainty of outcomes, and what is the outcome that you can say you will deliver but not overcommit, because it may not be the same as what you imagine at first.
Thanks for that really good question, Paris, and a great answer as well, Jen. It's a really, really important topic, actually, when we talk about collaboration and transdisciplinarity, particularly when it involves community members and not just professionals in organizations. Andrea, please go ahead.
Hi. Jane, this is a bit more personal. You did mention that you went through a transformative process through the PhD. So it's a little bit about this, but my question is more about, you worked with RISE, which was your case study before you did your PhD as a program coordinator in Indonesia. How did, kind of stepping back, well, I guess two questions. Did you decide to step back, or were you kind of seeing yourself as a part of all of this program? I remember that a few years ago you were thinking about kind of like a self-interview. Can't remember if it was autoethnography or it was another method, but considering your experience and integrating it into the research. So what was your relation, kind of like your past role, your PhD role, or your researcher and the program itself, and how did you manage that? Because it sounds very, very complicated. And I guess related to that is, how did you view kind of your past self differently? Did you see things differently after going through this very long process, this research project? You can answer as much as you want, because it might be a little bit personal.
Key question is, what was your personal transformation? We are all keen, but Andrea dared to ask that question, but everyone wants to know.
Oh my God. Okay, that could be such a colorful conversation, and we might have to have coffee and spend like a good hour on it. But that's such an important question. I think so. I was working as the RISE coordinator in Indonesia for about 18 months, maybe 15, and then the PhD position came up, and I applied. I discussed this with my supervisor. I applied for it. It was a competitive process, as you know. Like, there were 3 others that were admitted to the program. And but the experience itself was like being down in the ground, was being in the trenches, right? Like really close to where everything is and the action is. And then coming here was like being flung out to outer space. And then like this process has just been like 6 years of slowly floating and landing and redirecting, and like, just, it's really nice to finally have my feet on the ground again, maybe. And it's a different thing when your work has so much thinking and reflection. It's very mental. It's very mental in that sense. Like, we do think a lot as researchers, and then I realized that we really have to sustain ourselves in order to sustain the work that we're doing. Anyone really, and I think that's one of the good things that came out, like self-care, which, whatever you want to think of self-care, making sure we eat well and we sleep well, and looking after ourselves. Yep. And yeah, that was one of the good things that came out of this, I guess. Thank you for that question, Andrea.
Thank you. We'll get coffee.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? No, I just note that there have been a few comments in the chat. Jane, if you want to take a note of that before we all log off. People saying that they enjoyed your presentation and thanks for sharing your insights. And Pete has also shared an article that might be relevant for you to look at. Oh, Miriam, go ahead.
Can I ask another question? I was just wondering, because there's always like the scientific project process is a bit restrictive, and I'm wondering if there is some key insights that you gained from your work that you're not able to publish because that just doesn't fit in the paper frame, or something. Like, I'm just curious if there's like something that you took away from, probably leaning onto what Andrea said, asked. Is there something that you've learned from, I guess, your research really related, but that you couldn't really bring into one of the papers that you think the world should know?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess it was more like I had the sense that everyone was trying to tell me that this research is too big, you know? And I've like, you know, you can't solve all the world's problems and all of those things. And I do acknowledge that, yes, but I thought about it every time someone mentioned it. I really seriously thought about it, and I don't see this research in any doing this research in any other way. And I guess it's the opposite of what you're asking, Miriam. But if you believe in it, do it. Do it the way, because you know the way PhDs are has always been very deep and looking at a grain of sand with a microscope, and whereas like what I'm trying to do is look at things broadly across different fields, you know, and it's more about the way the research is done rather than what the actual research is.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. So thanks to a presenter that had a very short presentation and really stayed within time, which is not often the case in these seminars. We can finish a little bit earlier, and we can all have a chance to, you know, have a 15 minutes to your own and do some extra stuff that you were not thinking you would be able to do. So thanks, Jane, again, really appreciate it. And we wish you all the best in your future career and whatever you decide to do next. So we are really looking forward to staying in touch and also hearing about your successes going forward.
Thanks again, Shireen. And I'd just like to mention that there are a couple of people from RISE as well. That you know their participation and their engagement has been valuable to my research. And also some of the attendees from that maybe from Indonesia or that could identify with some of this research. So thank you all. It was
Excellent.
really nice meeting
Thanks.
everyone.
We're really glad that they could join us today. Yep. Great. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.